Welcome back to the Non-Dual Awakening podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today, we're continuing our exploration of the nature of consciousness with Elias. Thank you for joining us again.
It's my pleasure, Monica. These teachings on the true nature of the self are so vital, as most of us go through life completely identified with the ego character we think we are.
That's a profound point. Can you expand on how this identification with the ego creates such a fundamental obstacle to awakening?
Absolutely. You see, the core issue is that our consciousness, our true being, becomes completely entangled and identified with this false sense of self, the persona, the narrative, the roles and stories we've constructed about who we think we are. It's as if our limitless, spacious awareness gets trapped inside a small, constricted box of thoughts, beliefs, and conditioning. We mistake this ego character for our true nature, forgetting that we are the vast, open expanse of consciousness in which this finite self arises.
Can you give some concrete examples of how this identification with the ego self plays out in our daily lives?
Certainly. But first we need to understand the different parts of the self and how they work together. So, we have the body, the mind, and the consciousness that we can certainly ascertain that they exist as explained below. Since the time we are children, the body and mind overlook the existence of consciousness because it is always there. An example of this is when you rent an apartment next to a freeway. After the first or second week, you no longer hear the traffic noise because the mind blocks it out. Similarly, the mind blocks our awareness out and takes on its own life thinking, analyzing, creating stories of who we are and searching for love, meaning, and happiness in wealth, fame, and fortune and experiences with people, places, and things. Because the mind is always thinking and ignoring consciousness because it does not understand it, nor does it believe it exists. It does not believe it exists because the mind, being limited and small, cannot conceive of the immense, endless, and infinite nature of the knowing of our consciousness. Then, naturally, the consciousness being ignored just identifies with the mind. Our consciousness identifies mainly with the stream of our mind's thinking. Nothing wrong with the mind because it is a beautiful tool that helps us in everyday life. However, when the mind is left unchecked, it wreaks havoc in our lives. That is why in spiritual practice, we turn the mind's attention inward so that the mind becomes one with the consciousness, and then of course the awareness becomes aware of our true nature, which is our consciousness. To disidentify from the illusion of the mind, we need to turn our attention inwards in relaxation and resting on our awareness until we solidify and establish that we are that awareness. Otherwise, believing in the vanity of our minds, we are always externally focused looking for love in things, people, and places, because the ego self is created as a story in our brain's default mode network, and that ego is always externally motivated, searching for pleasures mainly to satisfy the body, because the ego mind identifies with the body. Here is an example of how the body-mind complex work together using each other, with the mind identifying with the body. The mind creates the character identity called ego to identify with the body. It does this in the brain's default mode network, DMN. The default mode network creates a story of a character that supposedly is real, feeling and doing different things in this world. The DMN recycles self-referential information and memories of the experiences of the body, its accomplishments, goals, etc. The mind and the body are like robots creating a vicious cycle of constant search for pleasures in external experiences like food, drugs, entertainment, and other bodily pleasures, etc. It all starts from childhood when we are given a name, and the mind creates a story around that name. That is why we care so much about our name. We name our children with our name, etc., believing we are that name and the story in our minds. However, we can just change our name anytime in court. Does that really change who we are? Of course not. Before we were called John, now we are called George. it does not make a meaningful difference in our identity. So because our consciousness awareness is mainly ignored by the mind, because the mind's main attention is in external things, consciousness identifies with the mind's stream of thoughts, which thoughts, by the way, mean nothing because they are just thoughts we believe to be true. So, absent our awareness, we operate solely from our thinking, believing our thoughts and the stories the mind creates about our lives. For example, when we drive to a destination, we can observe that we are thinking all along the way to our destination. When we approach or reach our destination, we are awakened from our daydreaming to our awareness of our consciousness. That is an example of how our consciousness is separate from our minds. It is there, and spontaneously appears from time to time, even without using our mind by turning our attention inwardly to find it and rest on our consciousness. The spontaneity of awareness is significant. It suggests that awareness isn't something we do, but rather something that we are or that happens. Our consciousness is also always present, otherwise we would not brake at a red traffic light despite being absorbed in daydreaming. So, absent our consciousness, the mind and body has to figure out what to do in everyday life among them and without the consciousness. That creates a problem. The example below will also show that there is no character in our bodies or in our minds making decisions. So the body feels a sensation of hunger. Notice there is no one having a sensation because the body just has a sensation. Then a thought arises in our consciousness. Notice that the thought arose alone because of the sensation. No character in our minds thought that thought. So sensations and thoughts arise independently of anyone sensing them or thinking them. Also, whether someone thinks in their mind that someone is sensing or thinking these thoughts, just remember that these thoughts are just thoughts. There is no one there thinking. They're just thoughts arising in our consciousness, and remember that when thoughts most of the time they arise, and they will always arise, we are not even conscious of these thoughts. A very common example of how our minds create havoc in our lives is how we get caught up in worrying about the future through the lens of this separate ego self. We'll have thoughts like, what if I lose my job? Or will my relationship last? And these mental narratives become so compelling that we start to frantically strategize, believing that our happiness and security depend on controlling these hypothetical outcomes. Another pervasive example is the way we get trapped in negative self-talk and stories about our inadequacies. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or nobody likes me, can become deeply entrenched, to the point where we completely identify with them and lose the ability to step back and observe them objectively. We think, I am a failure, rather than recognizing these as just passing thoughts. In both cases, the root issue is the same. We mistake this limited egoic self for the truth of who we are. We forget that we are the boundless awareness in which these thoughts and emotions arise and subside, and instead become completely absorbed and defined by them.
That's such an insightful perspective. So then, if our true nature is this vast, spacious consciousness, what is the purpose or function of the ego self and its constant stream of mental activity?
The ego self and the mind's thought processes are actually quite useful and necessary tools for navigating the world. They allow us to problem solve, plan, analyze information, and make decisions. Thoughts are like the software that helps us interface with the hardware of physical reality. The challenge arises when we forget that the ego is just a tool, and instead become completely possessed by it. We start to believe that our thoughts, our personal stories, and our limited sense of self are the absolute truth. This is where the recognition of our true nature, as the conscious awareness behind the ego, becomes so profoundly liberating. When we can step back and recognize ourselves as the silent witness, the open space in which all mental activity and the ego character arise and subside, we regain a profound sense of freedom. We're able to utilize the mind's capacities without being dominated or defined by them. The ego and its thoughts become like passing clouds across the vast sky of consciousness. We can observe them with equanimity, without getting caught up in their constant flux.
That's a beautifully eloquent way to describe it, the ego as the clouds, and consciousness as the boundless sky. So what is the key to actually stabilizing this recognition of our true nature beyond the ego?
The essential key is to cultivate the willingness and courage to turn our attention inward, beyond the identification with the ego self and the ceaseless activity of the mind. Through practices like meditation, self-inquiry, and simply resting in the present moment, we can begin to directly experience and embody the luminous, empty nature of consciousness itself. It's not about acquiring some new state or becoming something we're not. Rather, it's a process of letting go, relaxing the grip of the ego, and allowing the veils of illusion to naturally dissolve. We start to recognize that we are already the ever-present awareness that is the very source and substance of our being, beyond any limited sense of self or personal narrative. This recognition can come in the form of sudden, transformative insights, where the true nature of consciousness is revealed in a flash. But for many, it's a more gradual unfolding, where we have repeated glimpses and moments of clarity that slowly become more stabilized and integrated into our lived experience. The journey may involve some initial effort and discipline, but the ultimate realization is that we are already that which we've been seeking. Our true nature as pure awareness is ever present, ever available. We just have to stop grasping at the ego and let go into its timeless, boundless presence.
Beautifully expressed, Elias. These insights are truly profound and life-changing. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to emphasize for our listeners about this journey of self-discovery and awakening beyond the ego?
Yes, Monica. I would encourage everyone listening to approach this path with a spirit of patience, self-compassion, and trust in the wisdom of their own being. The recognition of our true nature as pure consciousness, beyond the limited ego self, is not something that can be forced or willed into existence. It arises naturally when we make the courageous choice to let go of our identification with the ego and open ourselves to the silence and simplicity of what we already are. Relaxing and resting in our awareness, not in our mind or our body, but in the awareness itself. After watching all the videos on this channel to understand the nature of the self, relaxing in meditation is all we need to do to become self-realized, ending the suffering of the mind and body, and finding permanent peace, love, and compassion. The mind and the ego may continue to generate thoughts, emotions, and mental narratives, but we can learn to hold them lightly, without getting caught up in their drama. In that spacious awareness, we discover the profound peace, freedom, and joy that is our birthright. It is there that we find the lasting fulfillment we've been seeking all along. So I invite all of you to embark on this journey with an attitude of gentle curiosity and reverence for your own true nature. Trust the process and know that the light of pure consciousness is always shining, even when the clouds of the ego and the mind seem to obscure it. With diligence and dedication, that light will grow ever brighter, revealing the magnificence of what you already are.
Beautifully said, Elias. Thank you for sharing these profound teachings with us today. I'm sure our listeners have gained invaluable insights and inspiration to deepen their own journey of self-discovery and liberation from the ego.
It has been my honor, Monica. May these words serve to guide all who hear them towards the recognition of their own timeless, boundless awareness beyond the limited confines of the ego self. Blessings on your journey.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Non-Dual Awakening podcast. Until next time, may you all abide in the peace and freedom of your true nature as pure consciousness, unbound by the tides of the ego. Thank you for listening. Created by Elias Stasinos. Please share and comment. Like and subscribe.